Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the San Francisco Interfaith Council weekly gathering, The Impact of COVID-19 on Public Transit. This is hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council and supported by the community branch of the San Francisco Emergency Operations Center. Just a few housekeeping tips to help you enjoy your virtual platform experience. We are recording. The audio, video, and chat will be monitored and recorded for record-keeping, training, and quality assurance purposes. To minimize distractions, all audio and video will be muted and shut off to keep from distractions. And the chat window is only available for direct messages to the community branch host of this event. We are also happy to announce that City Test SF is happening in San Francisco. Anybody who lives or works in San Francisco experiencing COVID-19 symptoms can get tested. For more info, please go to sf.gov/citytestsf. Again, welcome to this week's gathering of the San Francisco Interfaith Council Weekly, The Impact of COVID-19 on Public Transit. I would like to turn the floor over to Michael Pappas. Michael, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you to the community branch for all of your support each week. Good morning. I'm Michael Pappas, Executive Director of the San Francisco Interfaith Council. And on behalf of the Council, I want to welcome you to this morning's online briefing for faith leaders. As a transit-first city, San Francisco is committed to lowering carbon emissions, encouraging travel by cycling and public transportation, and minimizing the use of automobiles. Of the many sectors dramatically impacted by the coronavirus, transit in our city has not been exempt from the pandemic's wide net. Today's online briefing for faith leaders, hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council in collaboration with the San Francisco Department of Emergency Management's community branch, welcomes San Francisco Municipal Transit Agency Director Jeff Tumlin, who will address the impact of the coronavirus on transit in San Francisco. And now allow me to welcome friend and colleague and chairman of the board of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Kaushik Roy.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, everybody. As Michael mentioned, my name is Kaushik. It's my honor to be the chair of the board of directors for the San Francisco Interfaith Council. We want to thank all of you for joining us again. This weekly continuation of important topics, I think, is one that is going to be illuminating for all of us this morning, and we're lucky to have Jeff with us as well as the panelists to ask the questions. If you haven't joined a meeting of the Interfaith Council before, a special welcome to you. At the beginning of each Interfaith Council meeting or event, we have an interfaith statement which we like to read, so I will read that now before we continue with our morning's program. This is an interfaith community. Whatever our individual belief, it can be freely expressed here with no apologies. If we are invited to offer a prayer in this setting, it should be offered according to the tradition with which we identify. If we are invited to speak on a subject from the perspective of our tradition, we are free to do so without fear of offending those who come from another tradition. We come together as people of faith to learn from each other that we might better understand the multiplicity of faith traditions in our city and in our world. Good morning, everybody.
Thank you, Kaushik, and thank you for your continued leadership and support in all things. Dr. Mary Wardell Giraduzzi is the Vice Provost for Diversity, Engagement, and Community Outreach at the University of San Francisco. She's also the president of the San Francisco Library Commission and a board member for the San Francisco Interfaith Council. For the purpose of today, though, she is a woman of great faith. And in these times of unrest and race-related protests, we've asked her to come and ground us in a meditative moment to prepare us for the greater subject that we are going to talk about today. Mary?
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me this morning. It's a beautiful day, and there's so much hope that we have in the midst of pain and suffering. Rumain Brisbane, Jerame Reed, George Mann, Matthew Ajibade, Frank Smart, Natasha McKenna, Tony Robinson, Anthony Hill, Maya Hall, Philip White, Eric Harris, Walter Scott, William Chapman II, Alexia Christian, Brendan Glenn, Victor Manuel La Rosa, Jonathan Saunders, Freddie Blue, Joseph Mann, Salvador Ellsworth, Sandra Bland, and the list goes on. There's 100 names I have before me right now, right under 100 names that have been captured and were documented and made available by the National Public Radio of Black men and women and children who were slain at the hands of law enforcement over the last 10 years. And it is still not a comprehensive list. And the reason why I think it's important for us to begin with just a few of those names, and we don't have enough time allotted in this moment that I have with you to review all of them. It is critical for each one of us to understand that the work that we do through the San Francisco Interfaith Council, through the communities of faith, through our places of employment who are justice oriented, and we're seeking to do better by those who are most vulnerable in society. And that we've committed that as not only our responsibility, we accept it as our duty, that now is a time that each one of us is being called to a higher plane. I just wanted to open up this morning with a space of gratitude, because even as I said those names, we know that they're not lost souls. And I'm reminded in my faith tradition that when you don't have the words to say, you often will sing a song. That is the tradition of Black people that came through the transatlantic slave experience. And over a course of 400 years, have gone through slavery as an enslaved people, not as slaves, and have been able to be the guardians of this democracy that we call the United States of America, with such thoughtfulness, with such integrity, and with such a sense of duty. And one of the things that we do when it gets so difficult, when the democracy that we stand for, that we built with our hands and with our hearts, when it becomes too painful, a tradition in the Black community is that you often will sing. And there's so much music that has emerged in the popular culture today that has its roots from the pain and suffering of African Americans. And so one of the things that I like to do as we open this morning is to lift up those almost nearly 100 names just over the last 10 years and say that they're not lost. Why should I feel discouraged? And why should the shadows come? Why should my heart feel lonely and long for a heavenly home when Jesus is my portion? A constant friend is he. You know, his eye is on the little sparrow, and I know that he cares for me. Why should I feel discouraged? And why should the shadows come? And why should my heart feel lonely, lonely, waiting for a heavenly home? when Jesus is my portion. A constant friend is he, and his eyes on the sparrow, and I know he watches over me. And that song goes on, has a beautiful bridge, and the words of the bridge are, I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know that he watches over me. So I sing because I'm happy, and I sing because I'm free, 'cause his eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches over me. So let that song of both praise and joy and lamentations, all at the same time, encourage our hearts as we move into this meeting this morning and as we go into this weekend. As leaders of the city and county of San Francisco, we have to hold both joy and we have to hold suffering. That is part of the duty of leadership of those that are being called today. And so my hope is that you will feel that you have all that you need, because we have all that we need to do the work that we are called to do. And actually, we're all doing the same job, which is lifting up those that are on the margins and trying to make the society more equal and equitable for the common good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. What a blessing. Continue to pray for us. It is a great joy and privilege to welcome Jeff Tumlin today, who is the director of the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. Jeff has only been director of the agency since December, but he has a very long history of consulting the city and engaging in works around transportation in San Francisco. Jeff, I want to tell you that the San Francisco Interfaith Council has a rich history of collaboration with your agency, and that so many of our houses of worship are hubs for vulnerable sectors that you provide service for. And so we welcome you as a friend, as a colleague, and as a partner in our work. The floor is yours. Use this time as you see fit for the benefit of our faith leaders.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Mary, for your convocation. I was raised in a family of deep faith, but deeply conflicted faith. As many members as I had in my family, we had different faith traditions. And so I am very comfortable in this context. And I'm so glad to see that you all get along with each other so much better than members of my own family did with each other. So I'm honored to be here. And it's also been quite a ride. As Michael said, I started at the SFMTA in late December. And about a month later, the COVID virus arrived in the United States. And just as I was figuring out like how to use the copy machine, the mayor issued her first emergency order in late February. And then March 16th came the shelter-in-place order. We knew that we had to respond, and we had to respond quickly. And our first priority, of course, was protecting the health and safety of our workforce. A disproportionate number of whom are members of vulnerable populations. And so we made sure that our vulnerable and particularly frontline workers did not have to come into work, which had a huge impact on our service. Of course, the first thing that we did was we stopped service on the cable car and streetcar operations, because in those vehicles, we had the least protection for our operators. But as more of our workforce was staying home, we realized that the rail system was vulnerable. There were teams who operate the rail system where if we were to lose just a couple of people because of quarantine or any other issues, that the rail system was vulnerable. So in March, we took a radical resiliency approach to the system. We eliminated all of our rail services, shut down the subway, and went bus only, knowing that our buses were the most adaptable and resilient. All of our operators in the agency know how to drive a bus, and the buses aren't stuck on rails, so they can be adjusted readily in order to deal with the amount of service that we had available. By April 3rd, however, which was a Friday, it was looking like about 40% of our workforce was not going to be able to show up or would be showing up erratically. And so we called an emergency war room and spent the entire weekend rebuilding the whole transit system, stripping it down to its barest essentials. So our typical service has 76 transit lines. We decided to throw 100% of our resources at the 13 lines that served our essential destinations like the hospitals and the neighborhood commercial centers, that served our places where people had the fewest choices and who had the least access to essential services like food and employment and school. This was mainly the southeastern neighborhoods in the city, and also the lines where we had the highest ridership, so that we could do the best that we could under impossible circumstances. We also did something called headway management. So we completely abandoned our schedules because there was no way we were going to be able to serve anything remotely like a schedule, since we had no idea who was going to be showing up for work from one day to the next. So we switched to what was called headway management, where we asked our operators to basically just keep themselves evenly spaced between the bus in front and the bus behind. We did that work over a weekend, work that would normally take about 2 years, and implemented on Tuesday, finalized the implementation on Wednesday. Monday and Tuesday were really, really rough. But I have never in my entire career been more impressed by the hard work, the ingenuity, the collaboration and teamwork of the staff at the SFMTA. We've gone through a lot the last 6 months, and they have pulled through. And they've pulled through by paying attention to the core values of the agency, by treating each other with respect and taking care of each other's health, by focusing on our customers, and particularly the customers with the greatest needs. And it's revealed so much to us the last weeks of tragedy. We have had to obviously put the health of our workforce and our passengers first. We're spending a lot of time in collaboration with the Department of Public Health on making sure that we can do that. And the results have been, I mean, at this point, compared to what my counterparts in cities like New York or New Orleans or Detroit are going through, I was expecting to be going to a funeral a week. We've had a total of 13 COVID positive cases at the entire 6,000 person agency. We've had a 100% recovery rate. As far as we know, we've had 0 cases of virus transmission from one worker to another worker. And I wish I could claim credit for that. I can't claim any. I have a great debt to my counterparts at the Department of Public Health, but I'm mostly grateful to the fact that 100% of our workforce took the health guidance seriously. They took care of each other to make sure that this virus didn't transmit itself at work. And so we're continuing to keep that up. We also, of course, saw how this virus exposed and exacerbated every underlying inequity in our society. The people who could telecommute and stay home and shelter in place, largely office and technical workers, largely more affluent, mostly white. The people who ride our buses every day, the essential workers, and our own workforce, who still has to show up to work every day, not affluent, largely people of color, people who work shifts where if they're late for their shift more than a couple of times, they get fired. I don't get fired if I'm late for meetings, but our essential workers do. We had a moment where, given everything that we were facing, we were considering shutting down the overnight. You know, most of our lines operate, our key lines all operate 24 hours. And our operators are contending with a deepening of untreated mental illness on our streets. Folks who are being pushed around, who are unhoused and experiencing mental illness, oftentimes seek refuge on our buses because it's the only place for them to go. And of course that results in tensions, but as my staff were asking whether we could shut down the overnight service, I said I'd consider that, but first I want to see the data. And secondly, I want to make sure that you ride those lines and talk to the people who are riding the bus at 3 o'clock in the morning, because they're riding the bus at 3 o'clock in the morning because they have no other options. And they are, and they're shift workers. They're shift workers at hospitals. They're the dishwashers who clean up after you're done getting your takeout food. They're the security guards and custodial staffs at all those buildings that are seemingly empty, except for the people who are still working, cleaning to keep that building safe for the people who are now occupying them. So needless to say, we kept our overnight service and had a lot of conversations inside the agency about our responsibility, not only for, well, certainly, well beyond treating our passengers equally and beyond mere equity in the form of providing the best service to those who have the fewest choices, but moreover, our role in correcting for the horrific history of our own industry. We have a duty of reparations. The transportation industry knocks 10 to 15 years off the lifespan of Black and brown children growing up in specific neighborhoods here in San Francisco and Oakland, because of a long history of using transportation investment, frankly, as a tool of apartheid. San Francisco built its freeway network where it did because we got extra points for blight removal, which of course was defined as people of color ownership. The Geary Expressway, which we're rebuilding right now, was built where it was and specifically funded because its purpose and need statement said that project was necessary to, quote, halt Negro advancement into Pacific Heights. My industry continues to dump particulate emissions onto the formerly red line neighborhoods that the freeways were designed to contain. We continue to design streets to prioritize high-speed car traffic only in lower income neighborhoods, and to invest in transportation in ways that denies historically disadvantaged neighborhoods ready access to employment, to school, to healthy food, to all of the mechanisms of escaping from poverty. And so these weeks have been a time of compounding. I started work at this agency at the peak of a peak economy. And even in the peak of a peak economy, we had to confront the fact the SFMTA had a built-in structural deficit San Francisco is wealthier than it has ever been in its history. We should have the resources in order to deliver transportation services that our people need. And yet, because of the way how we here in California have built municipal government finance, our expenses as a government agency increase with the cost of living because our expenses are driven by labor and we have to provide our workers a living wage. And you all know what the cost of housing and healthcare is doing in the Bay Area. We have to provide our workers with a living wage. And so our expenses increase with the cost of living, but our revenues increase at best with inflation. And so when San Francisco is in a boom cycle, that gap between revenues and expenditures widens at a rapid pace, which means our ability to deliver services decreases. And so, yes, Muni is well known as not the most reliable service in the world, and we should be doing better. The reason we are not succeeding at our mission is not because of a lack of talent or hard work in the agency staff. It's because of the way government, particularly municipal government finance, is built in California. It's designed to fail. So part of my effort is to deal with the reality of our finances as an agency, while at the same time trying to correct for the ways in which we have specifically targeted and harmed people of color and stripped them of opportunity. We're now, of course, in this COVID era, facing an unprecedented economic collapse. We are, I was going to give you a whole slide presentation with our recovery plan. Apparently, I'm not going to do that. I think I'm just going to ramble on extemporaneously. So COVID has, so COVID cut our capacity as a transit provider by about 60% because of social distancing. We are now facing an additional 20% loss of service as a result of the economic impact of COVID, meaning we're down to about 15% of our pre-COVID ability to move people. At the same time, we had thought that we had until August. That's apparently not the case. Congestion came back to the San Francisco Bay Area on Tuesday of last week. All of the major highways throughout the region have reached their maximum automobile throughput. We cannot move any more cars through the regional highway system or through the major South of Market primary San Francisco grid than we're moving this week. And the economy is about 10% open. We are expecting a complete crush of traffic congestion beyond what any of us have ever seen. Probably next month, certainly by August when the schools open. This region's economic recovery is going to be completely halted because of the inability of the transportation system to move any more cars than it does today, and the constraints that have been placed upon the transit system. So our recovery plan that we're developing tries to address all of these topics simultaneously. We're trying to address the simple geometry of moving people in a region where we are no longer demolishing neighborhoods in order to widen highways, and in a region in which it takes up more than 10 times as much space to move somebody in a car than it does on foot or in a bike or in a bus. And we don't have any more roadway space and are not ever going to get any more roadway space. So how do we move people in a post-COVID era when our travelers are rightly concerned about the safety of public transit? Is it safe to ride a bus or to take BART? We're currently not doing a very good job in this country of making sure that public transit is safe. As we look to the Eastern European or Eastern Asian democracies, particularly cities like Taipei or Seoul, we see that it is that bringing back public transit and allowing buses and trains to be full of people is absolutely essential in order to allow economic recovery to continue. And that social distancing is a really clumsy mitigation strategy. One that we have here in the United States, largely because we were the least prepared country in the world in order to deal with the pandemic. So one of the things that we're starting to partner with the Department of Public Health on right now is figuring out what are the virus transmission mitigation strategies that can work on public transit so that we no longer have to rely on social distance. And pulling a lot of data, not only from East Asia, but also the European capitals that are all facing the same conundrum. And a lot of those challenges will be around how much social control are we prepared to have here around issues like making face coverings absolutely mandatory as a condition of entry in order to protect others, doing things like temperature screening at stations, doing things most concerningly around contact tracing, using video surveillance, which is common in Europe and Asia, but culturally not something we do here in the United States. Moreover, we're going to have to look at to what degree can we protect transit from being stuck in the mess of congestion. Are we ready to put transit-only lanes elsewhere in our primary transit network, even if that means taking away space for cars or taking away space for parking, just in order to be able to move people and to continue to open the economy? Similarly, we're asking questions about, are we ready to have a protected network of corridors where anyone can feel safe walking or biking or using a scooter or a wheelchair? Our Slow Streets program, with a rocky start, has been wildly successful, far more popular than we were expecting. We're running up against our limits in terms of our work crews to be able to expand it. We're expanding it very rapidly. Can we pull that together in an entire citywide network? If people don't feel comfortable taking transit, perhaps they would feel comfortable on a scooter or a bike or other small mobility device. But that requires far more rapid change than San Francisco has ever done. I mean, at least for 100 years. So we are going to be asking these questions. We started this week asking our own MTA board. We're going to be taking further questions to the Board of Supervisors next week. And we're trying to have conversations like these because in order to ask big questions like this, we would typically want a lot of community engagement, engagement that is very difficult to do in this strange time. So as we talk about genuine equity and listening to community, but also the need to go far faster than we've ever done before. I mean, we have until August. How do we balance those conflicting desires with each other? It's really hard. I should also add a couple of other points around how we manage curbs and streets. So we're also knowing that we play an essential role in supporting small businesses and institutions like our faith communities. We are going to be starting to do parking enforcement, both of meters and of street cleaning, starting in about 2 weeks. But we're wanting to do that thoughtfully and engaged with local businesses and faith leaders. As I hope you know, the primary reason that we charge for parking is to ensure that motorists can find a space. We vary the price of parking and always charge the lowest rate that allows motorists to find 1 or 2 empty parking spaces on every block or in every parking lot at all times of day. So as we turn the meters back on, we're we're gonna have to adjust to a new normal about what that rate should be. But we also want to ask all of you the question about should we, in order to support restaurants, enforce meters in commercial districts later at night, in order to create availability for parking on all of the days of the week that our communities of faith need to bring in your congregations from increasingly farther distances. Can we help by charging for parking in thoughtful ways? Or does that hurt us? Do you have enough availability for your congregations and you want that parking to be free so that we could push the hours enforcement to allow your communities to get there and park free? Or are residents in the surrounding neighborhoods filling up the spaces that you could need and you might like us to charge for parking later into the night before your morning service? Or these are all things that we want actually to engage with all of you on. Similarly, our restaurants are wanting to close off streets in order to fill streets with tables. So that restaurants can serve outside where the virus transmission rates are really low. Is that something that will get in the way of people being able to come to their congregations, or something that might actually help if it's done in a thoughtful way where the restaurants fill the space in the evenings, but then the tables get withdrawn and parking is available for morning services? Keeping in mind, of course, that all of you have different services at different times of day and days of the week. I should probably stop there and take some questions. I'm sorry for my rambling. I was actually going to give you a PowerPoint presentation, but that may have actually been a little bit more useful for this group.
This was very enlightening, and thank you also for, in addition, for sharing through the lens of the pandemic, sharing through the lens of equity, because at this time that conversation could not be more important. And I just want to say, Jeff, that the agency has been very proactive in talking about issues with the faith community that impact the faith community, but also issues that we can help the agency. And we are very blessed to have with us today 3 panelists. Each of them is involved in your work, but I thought it might be interesting for you to hear about their work, and then they'll ask you a question. The first is Reverend Allison Jacks. She is an associate minister at the First Unitarian Universalist Church. I first came to know Allison when, for many, many years, you all have been promoting Bike to Work. We said, why not Bike to Worship? And so we were, Allison was really a leader in that. I know that she is very engaged with the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. So without further ado, I am going to turn the floor over to Allison Jacks, Associate Minister of the First Unitarian Universalist Church, to talk about how the pandemic has impacted cycling, but also to ask you a question, Jeff.
Hi, Michael. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I feel honored and privileged to be a part of the panel. And Jeffrey, thank you for your comments. They're weighty and they're complex. And I really am both impressed and amazed at the level of the kind of thinking, creative, challenging thinking you're all doing, because the intersections just are so many, and to kind of untangle that and find a way forward is going to take time. And so I just really appreciate all the work that you're doing to support your staff, to be thinking as broadly and widely as you are as to how to find a way forward. I don't envy you, but I really appreciate what you're doing. So I just want to say I have been a bicycle commuter in the city of San Francisco for 35 years. And so I have really seen the city progress in many ways, which I'm super grateful for. And it's, when I think of the old days and the critical mass rides from way back, to see, a real great change happening. So I'm very proud of what the city has done, and the SFMTA, and certainly with the Bike Coalition and partners all over, to make bike commuting a more equitable and open opportunity for families, children, all kinds of people to be out on the streets. Safety obviously is a huge issue, as we know. And so, and to Michael's this kind of referencing that the bike to worship idea is something that, you know, I've had for many, many years, and as a minister with the UU Church in San Francisco, just to feel that, you know, in our faith tradition, as in others, you know, issues around climate justice, racial justice, economic justice, I mean, they're all tied, and the threads weave through all of those. And so to say around issues of transportation and a city committed to transit first, that we have to see those three linked. You can't separate them out. And so my question, I guess, is I've been thinking about a comment that was made at the interfaith protest that was on Monday at City Hall, where one of the speakers was saying, you know, we're talking about bike lanes and traffic signals when the issues we need to be talking about are much deeper and broader than that. And I thought, right on, that is a totally legit comment. And the question I have is, given the situation we're in, where transit, public transit, BART, Muni, the trains, all of them, you know, when we will see our way back to that, the challenge of the congested streets, that creating a bike system, a safe, networked bike system that is really thinking about equity, racial justice, and economic opportunity around the city to move people through the city. I guess that's my question, is to say how you're thinking about how to expand the bike system and the bike lanes to build a stronger, to build on opportunities that everybody can participate, and looking at this issue of congested traffic, of how it's going to become that much more important to have a bike network that is really open and available to all people, that is going to make them feel safe as their ways to move around. And I'll just throw in my last one, that the issue of bike parking is huge, and it will become bigger because of all of this. So with that, Jeffrey, take it away.
So one of the things that I've been trying to do at the SFMTA is to bust us out of our modal silos. So rather than looking, you know, just at bikes or just at transit or just at walking, I'm trying to get the entire agency to realize that transportation is an investment strategy, and it needs to work as a system, and we need to be clear about what are our values and what are the outcomes that we're trying to optimize for. So we're wanting to be clear about equity, but not force our own view of equity on neighborhoods that may have very different views about equity. So we're trying to ask people what they need. And at this time, what we're really having to rely upon is the individual members of the Board of Supervisors and their teams to really get a sense of what to prioritize. So for example, in Viz Valley and Bayview and Hunters Point, it's been made really clear to us that the biggest mobility priority there is improving the transit system. So we cut transit service the least in those three neighborhoods, and to the extent that we cut, we have brought transit service back first. We are also looking at, even though our revenues are completely devastated, and you know, we are looking at 20% citywide service cuts. We know that specifically Hunters Point needs better connectivity to job centers, and it needs faster connectivity. So we are actually looking at doing some transit service improvements there, which will simply mean deeper transit service cuts elsewhere, because that's the price of equity. Equality is the enemy of equity. So we're having to dramatically shift resources around in order to make that work. At the same time, to our surprise, like we started our Slow Streets program in the Sunset District because that was where we cut the most transit service and we felt the most urgent need for kind of restorative justice for the Sunset. To our surprise, the Slow Streets and the Sunset have been insanely successful. A neighborhood where just 5 years ago, people would have said, no one bikes in the Sunset. you can go out to Kirkham, and particularly the Great Highway or 41st Avenue, and it's full of families with kids teaching their kids how to skateboard or ride a bicycle for the first time. The rates of riding that we're seeing particularly on the Great Highway and Golden Gate Park on the Panhandle, higher than they have ever been in city history, even though total travel is less than half still of normal. So I think we're demonstrating that very small modes of transportation actually can play a substantial mobility role in San Francisco if we invest in facilities that don't target 28-year-old white guys in Lycra, but target older adults, carrying groceries, or an 8-year-old, on a bicycle. Designing for middle school kids to be able to get around the city independently, because nothing signifies safety and rightness than seeing, an African-American girl, or a disabled person in a mobility device, or an older woman with groceries, and when all of us who see that can see ourselves. I'm sorry, I'm rambling and probably not actually getting to the point. I think there's an interesting point, I think, particularly in the Sunset, where for the first time, I am seeing the bike usage in the Sunset that almost perfectly matches the age, ability, and ethnic demographics of the neighborhood. And I don't think that's ever happened before in San Francisco. I think that we still have, in neighborhoods that where we have high concentrations of remaining African-American population, we still have a lot of work to do to engage with those communities to really find out what it is that they want and need, rather than to impose our views upon them. And that's one of the things that I think why Slow Streets is getting more traction, is it's not just bike infrastructure, right? It's safety infrastructure for everyone. It's play infrastructure for kids. And it excludes no one, right? You can still drive a car down a slow street. You can still get to your driveway. It just says on this street, you're a guest if you're in a car, and please drive with extra caution.
Excellent.
Can I ask you to speak to the bike parking question, just because, when we start moving towards people back to work, in the many ways that happens, in making it so that bicycling is, a reasonable and fair and safe option, people will need to have places and spaces, and to have, I'm sorry to say, the scooters taking up a lot of those spaces. How do we address that?
Yeah, I mean,
we have two other panelists.
Yep. Okay, we're trying to catch up with that. It's a resource constraint.
I'm sorry.
Oh, it's the bike parking is it's a resource constraint issue. We're trying to catch up, but we agree with you.
And I'm sure we're going to have an opportunity in extended conversations to address these issues. You've been emphasizing the issue of safety. Our next panelist, John Alex Lowell, is a steering committee member for the San Francisco Bay Area Families for Safe Streets. He is a survivor of a collision. He is an activist and someone I admire and respect greatly. John, would you kind of give us a very brief look at how the COVID has impacted your work and your activism, and then pose a question to our guest speaker?
Thank you very much, Michael Pappas, for doing your work in the San Francisco Interfaith Council, and particularly you, Jeffrey Tumlin. I'm so glad to hear you speak again. I heard you earlier this week at the commissioners meeting of SFMTA, and in fact, 4 months ago when I met you or heard you speak at Manny's Cafe at the corner of Valencia and 16th. Thank you. I, as a collision survivor and a member of Families for Safe Streets, which is an activist group within Walk San Francisco, which is on Hayes Street between Franklin and Goff. We in Families for Safe Streets, we comprise people who have been impacted, and that's a double use of the word, impacted by traffic collisions, and felt the detrimental and deadly effect here in San Francisco and further in the Bay Area of people running the red light, going through stop signs without even slowing down, and left and right turns and speeding, which is called Focus on the Five, which began essentially in 2014 with Vision Zero. And the Vision Zero goal is to reduce, well, frankly, stop all traffic collisions and the subsequent possible fatalities in San Francisco by 2024. We're far away from that. But what we are near to now, Jeffrey Tumlin, is because of the reduced traffic on the road, time and place is so important to you and the safety engineers in SFMTA to make decisions and to implement tools which have been shown in San Francisco and other cities around the USA and the world to work to reduce collisions, particularly those who are rushing from right now, the active 22 bus over to the active 9. If they are going on that sidewalk near 16th and Potrero needs to be improved in safety for the vulnerable pedestrians. I am a vulnerable pedestrian because it was a red light runner who hit me as I was walking across 14th Street along Mission, or walking across Mission along 14th Street 19 years ago. So I ask you, Jeffrey, how you and the SFMTA can pass and implement a no turn on red policy for the 130 miles of streets in the high injury network of San Francisco. Second factor of that question is, how can you immediately bring left turn calming at all intersections of the high injury network as soon as possible? And that relates to timing and location, because the rush of cars on the streets in San Francisco has not yet started. The throughways of Oakenfeld, yes, and other throughways, Franklin and Goff, they're cooking, but we have strategic time, you have strategic time to implement those safety changes right now. And one thing that is very relevant to the safe streets, and that's called daylighting. How can daylighting be thoroughly done on two precious streets, Clement, in which a lot of seniors are very active on, and seniors are vulnerable. Also, people with disabilities and families with little children in carriages, or they're in front or on their backside, carry bags for little babies and toddlers. How can this be done right now during this horrific pandemic of the COVID-19 disease? Thank you, Jeffrey, for your work, and may it continue on. And in the short run, how can we do those three things I mentioned?
Thank you.
Thank you, John. So here in San Francisco, typically 40 people die every year as a result of traffic violence. And usually about 100% of those are preventable. And in addition, typically around 3,000 people are injured severely enough to actually end up with a hospital record that allows us to collect data on that.
Right.
So one of the remarkable aspects of COVID is it is now the deadliest thing facing us in San Francisco, as opposed to traffic violence, something my agency has before. We also lost another person just last week on Frederick Street. A cyclist was riding along Frederick Street. A motorist was not paying attention, flung their car door open, hit the cyclist, knocked the cyclist over, who was then run down by a second motorist who was driving too fast and didn't have time to stop. Preventable crash in 2 ways. So this is a topic we take very seriously. We also spend the bulk of our resources on the street side in addressing safety. And we work to address safety drawing mainly upon the data. So we keep track of where crashes are all over the city. We have our high injury network that we're steadily working towards all the ways in which we can reduce crashes on that network. And the most effective tools, however, are illegal in California. Here in California, the state always prioritizes the convenience of motorists over the life safety of everyone else. And the State Vision Zero Task Force came up with a whole set of recommendations that have been being debated in the state, and we were hoping would go forward to legalize some of the most effective safety tools that are common everywhere else in the world, but still not allowed here in California. Unfortunately, Assemblymember Friedman has had to delay that work because of the state's priority of focusing on COVID response. This is really disappointing because it's all the tools that are most cost effective and easiest for us to implement, including being able to establish speed limits based upon safety outcomes rather than motorist convenience. Very importantly, automated speed enforcement, probably the single most effective thing that we can do. And as well as having the ability to do additional red light camera enforcement or turn restriction enforcement. As we look at the data, while banning right turns on red is useful at specific intersections where that movement is a problem, like on Market Street, where there was a safety record, for most of the city, that's not where we're getting the crashes. The crashes are happening for other reasons and all compounded by speed. So we're wanting to focus on the techniques that actually matter based upon the actual crash patterns in specific locations. Banning all right turns on red also requires a massive enforcement response in order to have it be at all effective. And our police department obviously has limited resources as well, and we are wanting them to focus on the worst behavior, not behavior that is actually not a huge contributor to the safety problem. So our work is now focusing on things that are within our reach. We're now likely going to be minimizing most of the peak period parking tow away, which can help to protect pedestrians in the sidewalk. We're continuing to advance intersection daylighting that requires staff effort that takes away from our ability to do slow streets. But that effort is expanding. We're absolutely continuing to advance transit-only lanes. And the impact of transit-only lanes is very much positive for pedestrian safety because for streets where there are more than 2 lanes of car traffic going in one direction, eliminating that 3rd lane by turning into a bus lane actually has tremendously positive safety results on our big arterials. So there's a lot that we are doing, and we see Walk SF as a strong partner. But we also want to make sure that we are reliant primarily on the actual safety data, as well as the proven programs that work for addressing those specific issues.
Thank you. Last but not least, a colleague and a friend, Lior Milgram-Gardner, Northern California Director for California Interfaith Power and Light. I first met Lior when she was trying to set up parking, Allison, at congregations. And now I know she's doing some incredible work on charging stations. Lior, would you kind of give us an overview on your work and how the COVID-19 has impacted it, and then offer a question for dear Jeff?
Yes, good morning, everybody, and I'm so honored to be here. As a resident of San Francisco, car-free with 2 little kids, I am so grateful for the work of making our streets safer and allowing us to get around in ways that are doing the best for our bodies, but also for the environment. So California Interfaith Power and Light is a faith-based organization committed to climate action. We work with communities, people, and people of faith and conscience on calling in our moral thoughts to take action to protect the environment. And as it relates to transportation, we are well aware of the intense number that right now, the way we move around and the way that our goods move around is the largest source of carbon pollution in California. And we have to change that. And so, yes, we've been working on electrifying the transportation system. I am very proud to share that we have been working with the chapel at the Presidio and the Presidio Trust to have EV chargers within walking distance there. But what I'm here most about is to talk about the, beyond the car, beyond the electrification, and on the people side of things. So, like everybody, that our houses of worship have had to adjust to our shelter-in-place orders. And so we have seen programs, worship, and everything in between happening over Zoom and remote access. And so with that, our not attending our services has been part of the major drop of carbon pollution, of visible pollution. Air quality has been improving, and all across California, including in San Francisco and some of the hardest hit pollution areas, the sky has been clearer. We have been breathing cleaner air, and our roads have been, there have been fewer cars on them. And so my question is really on how to maintain that. We've gotten a taste of this clean air. We don't want to go back to what was. We want our streets to be cleaner. We want our climate to be better. And Jeff, my question to you is, as a faith-based organization that works with congregation across San Francisco and across the whole Bay Area, how do we partner with you in doing this work? We know we get to talk about morals and the need to protect our neighbor and future generations. How do we keep this going in the long run, because we don't want this to be temporary?
Well, so actually, Lior, first of all, it's great to see you. I hope you're enjoying raspberries. Secondly, so this is the challenge of our generation, and it is particularly a challenge to decarbonize the transportation sector at the same time we're advancing equity. We need to recognize that going out and purchasing gasoline is an act of violence against the planet and an existential threat to this coastal city. It is also necessary for many people in order to be able to meet their basic needs, right? There's this fundamental contradiction where we've arranged society to be completely dependent upon this technology that is killing us. So we have to proceed gently and with compassion because we have constructed society with this dependency. And I think we also need to bring some joy to it. No one, and particularly we Americans, changes our perspective because we're shamed into it. We need to be drawn towards grace. We need to see the joy in getting going about our lives in a way that is not dependent upon fossil fuels. But that also means doing the work that's necessary in order to correct for the ways in which we've denied people the opportunity to access work and their congregation and opportunity except by driving. So So for each of us, we can do the best that we can do in our own personal lives, but we can also campaign for the resources necessary in order to design a society that is no longer dependent on fossil fuels. In fact, to design a society in which a third of household income is not spent on basic mobility, right? I mean, that's, in the face of rising rents in San Francisco, we in transportation can correct for some of that and keep communities whole by reducing the financial and time cost of mobility and expanding access to opportunity. This requires that transportation and land use work together. It requires, working in neighborhoods to ensure that there are sufficient households available in the neighborhood to justify the supermarkets and restaurants and community services that are necessary in order to allow all San Franciscans to have the needs of daily life be available within walking distance. Our best neighborhoods in San Francisco are outrageously expensive because they are so convenient. I sold my car last year and was terrified of doing so and didn't think how I could possibly live a life without one. And I've realized that because I'm fortunate to live in a neighborhood like Noe Valley, my life works. It wouldn't work if I were living in the OMI or in the Bayview or in this valley. So how do we make sure that residents in Visitation Valley have access to all of the pleasures of urban life that I do, so that they don't have to spend not only a third of their income, but tons of CO2 emissions on taking care of the needs of daily life? So that's less of an answer and more of a set of questions for all of you, but it's the best I can do.
Thank you. And to Lior's question, and it might be enlightening to you, Jeff, I think the last time I saw you, Jeff, was at the mayor's press briefing just before Passover and Easter. And I'm going to say something that I said then, and it goes for now, is that I want to commend our faith leaders for the incredible role they've played in helping to pivot to online worship and virtual ministry. And they are not rushing to reopen their doors. Their primary concern is certainly the health and the safety and the protection of their congregants. What they have seen, though, as a result of online worship is an increase in attendance and, in some cases, an increase in giving.
Really?
And there has been a unique equity because people who otherwise could not get to worship are on the same par now with all of those who are attending worship. It's an interesting phenomenon. The congregation leaders are going to be slow in going back to worship just because they want to protect everyone. So you will see online worship continuing, even though the doors will open, and primarily because there will be fewer people allowed to be in sanctuary. So it will be gradual, but I think that the COVID has taught us things that we never expected. So there have been blessings, as Lior pointed out in her opening statement, and I hope that we all learn from these lessons to better take care of our environment and our transit system. Jeff, thank you so much for enlightening us today. Thank you to all our panelists. I wish we had so much more time. I know that this is a conversation which is going to continue, so we'll continue to engage you. I also want to thank Cynthia Zambucas, the program and administrative associate of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, for her continued work to help make these shows possible. And to our San Francisco Department of Emergency Management Community Branch, John McKnight, who is the coordinator, our lead production staff, Kristen Lane, Josephine Chen, Sharon Walton, Trey Russell Allen, and Kristen Sindabad. Next week, we're going to welcome City Assessor and Recorder Carmen Chu, who is going to talk to us about the work of the San Francisco Economic Recovery Task Force. And you hit on so many of the points today, Jeff, and so it promises to be a very engaging and enlightening show. I would, at this point, welcome John McKnight of the Department of Emergency Management's Community Branch to speak with us about citywide testing. John? In the absence of John,
I'm back. Okay, there we go. We just need to get a moment for the meeting. Thank you so much, everyone. I want to make sure everyone is aware that free testing for COVID-19 is available to all San Francisco residents and essential workers coming into the city of San Francisco. Please take advantage of this wonderful resource. Go to City Test SF. Just look up in your browser, City Test SF, and you'll find a page where in under 3 minutes you can register and go to a site, hopefully close to where you are, where you can receive free testing. I encourage everyone to take advantage of this now while you're healthy, so that when the time comes, should the time come that you or a family member find yourselves ill, you'll know exactly how to make this go forward. Please take advantage of this wonderful resource, and thank you to everybody who's made this possible. Thank you, Michael, for this time to bring this up.
and thank you, John, and to our staff for making these programs possible. We look forward to seeing you all next week. This concludes today's presentation. Have a beautiful weekend, and look forward again to seeing you next week.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay.